Andrew Callahan. The Patriots signed Kyle Duggar. Kind of put in perspective where that contract lands in terms of other safeties in the NFL and what this speaks of the Patriots' formula for building the team.
So Kyle Duggar now, according to Over the Cap, is the sixth highest paid safety in the league by total contract value, by average annual value at $14.5 million per year, and the fifth highest paid safety in total guarantees, which is just about $32 million, I believe. Might be 32 and a half. So he's paid like a player that right now is not aligned with where he's at. Like, I don't care who you ask, unless it might be an extension of his family. He's not a top 5, top 6 safety in the league. But this is how free agency works, because this contract is going to age better over the coming years. And that happens virtually with every contract signed in free agency. What I think this is, though, is the Patriots committing as much to Kyle Duggar as their own word. Like, we heard from Elliott Wolf at the Combine saying we want to extend our core players. And what the Patriots did when they applied the transition tag was really box out the rest of the market, because he was going to get $13.8 million guaranteed in a one-year deal. And that was it. And no one else, we saw a tweet from Dan Duggar from The Athletic, really made an offer to Kyle Duggar. And so they knew this. This was a gamble. It paid off. They cornered the market. And yet it seems like they made, at least for now, an overpay. To me, that was saying, look, we got the money, we got the cash. Off-season program starts Monday. Let's get him in. Let's do what we said we would and sign him to a long-term deal.
All right. Isn't that the best way to spend your money, though? Is retaining people that you believe can build culture instead of just, overpaying for a 30-year-old receiver or something like that and bringing him in the building?
Sure. I mean, I would say it's best to overpay players who are going to win games. And if you are someone who's against this deal, and for the record, I would give this, the vicinity of like a C+, just because, again, I just don't think a safety who's not a strong coverage player deserves to be paid like a top 5, top 6 player at his position. But to your point, into the larger one of like, we can't say out of one side of our mouths, oh, the Patriots need to spend, and then they retain one of their 5, 6 best overall players in this, granted, pretty crappy roster, and be like, oh, well, that wasn't a good use of their money. Like, this is when you have the money, spend it. If you give an extra couple $1 million per year, I'm not going to crush them considering where Kyle Duggar is right now on their roster and their depth chart in their locker room.
Okay, but I'm sorry, John, but do they have does this talk about the NFL in terms of like player, like what does this mean? Does this mean anything to the team? Like when you show a willingness to reward guys that do well for you, does this, in your opinion, kind of change perspective and maybe is a motivating factor for players, or is that not a thing?
No, I think it definitely is. And we saw this on the report card, right? Like, the ownership for every single team was rated on willingness to spend from the NFLPA report card, released 2 months ago. And Robert Kraft was in the bottom 10 for that. And a lot of that was a reflection of not just player salaries, which there's a salary floor in the league, 90% of the salary cap in terms of cash spending every 3 years, but facilities, treatment, your resources in the building. And I think what this says is, look, everyone in that locker room understood, how hard Kyle Duggar worked. Like, he fit all of the cliches. First in, one of the last out, studies film, takes care of his family. Like, that's it. So if they were unwilling to pay him, that sends a bad message. The fact that they did definitely sends a good message. And we already saw guys who wanted to stay. Josh Uche, Anthony Jennings, all these guys who re-signed. But the message to me that's actually more important than that is to send one to the outside of, hey, if you're not from here, we're still willing to pay you too.
Isn't it a positive, though, that they have retained pretty much their entire starting defense from last year? I mean, it lost in a terrible season was that the defense is pretty good, and they have everyone back from last year.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think when you look even a little bit deeper, all of the players who played at least half of their defensive snaps last year, with the exception of Miles Bryant, are back. And when you look at Miles Bryant, first of all, obvious fan favorite, but they have a replacement in line for him who's more talented, and that's Marcus Jones, who got hurt in week 2 last year. We didn't see anything from him the rest of the year. So really, you're talking about bringing everybody back. And the last time they did that was 18 going into 19. Very different roster, but it was a Super Bowl team, and they had the number 1 defense in the league that next year in 2019. Now, it might have been a little bit of a paper tiger towards the end against good quarterbacks, but I think we're looking at possibly a top 5 defense here next season.
And if you're trying to build this team, it makes sense to do it the way Fred was talking about with retaining players, which is, the way to do it. You get these guys early, you develop them. Hopefully you get good years out of them when you're not paying them a lot, but then you keep them on. But specifically for the Patriots, they almost have to do it defensively because there's so much that needs to be done on offense. If you want to be competitive while you're in this rebuilding phase, it makes sense to me to do as much as you can defensively, whether it's bringing back a pretty good defense from last year and hopefully adding to it. It's not the sexiest way of doing it, but if you want to have a competitive product at all, you have to do it on that side of the ball.
Right. Or if you just want to, keep your strengths intact, right? Like we know defense is the only area where they can kind of set it and forget it with all these different players. And again, I understand people who I would agree with to a point of Kyle Duggar got a little overpaid. That's fine. But you're not in a position or in the business right now of letting some of your most talented players walk out the door for nothing. Because if he left, you are not going to get a comp pick based on their expected spending next year when they lead the league in salary cap space for 2025. They still lead it in 2024. This space is going to roll over into next year. And so the amount that they're going to spend on free agents is going to kind of cancel out losing Kyle Duggar. And it's forgive me, this actually applies to this year, but it's just, you're not going to get a pick that's worth losing him. I think at this point in the prime of his career, it's a 4-year deal. It'll probably amount to more 2 or 3. And I think it's a fine deal.
Okay, now let's talk about the draft, which is thankfully coming up soon. What are you hearing about who would be available? What do you think? What are you hearing about the Commanders pick?
I haven't heard anything new. I wrote a column last week just to remind everyone, like, hey, this is peak silly season, right? Like April Fool's Day lasts the first 3 weeks of April, not one day on the NFL calendar because of just how much bleep that is thrown against the wall to see if it sticks. And some of it's also, again, people think they hear the right thing and they don't. But I think it makes sense whether you look at the betting markets, you hear the insiders, Adam Schefter saying last week in his podcast, all signs point to Jaden Daniels going number 2 to Washington. There's kind of a loose connection here with Cliff Kingsbury, who was at USC where Jaden Daniels had been before. And, they didn't overlap, but the type of system that Cliff Kingsbury likes to run operates best with a highly mobile quarterback, which obviously Jaden Daniels is. So I think right now the most obvious pick, the most commonly reported pick would be Jaden Daniels. And if not, I think we all know it should be Drake May. So it's still one of those two guys at number 2.
Who do you like the most?
I like Drake May, and I have a story coming out in the Herald tomorrow. It's a full-on scouting report. I've watched every single throw. I've watched every single run of Drake May from the last year and 2. And Doug Kai, my colleague at the Herald, did the same for Jaden Daniels. Today, it's in the paper. It's online. You can find everything you want to know about him. And I just look and just say, I think the ceiling here is higher. I think he checks more prototypical boxes. The Patriots should be thrilled with either. But May's got something as far as extending plays and creating something out of nothing that I don't think Daniels does as far as throwing the ball. And I think that right now, when you look at the elite quarterbacks across the league, all of them do that. That separates the great from the elite.
You think so when you watch him, you think he could be a great quarterback in the NFL?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's encouraging. So, I mean, what do you say to all the people that then go, well, trade down or take Marvin Harrison, which we hear a lot. Which I don't like, but go ahead.
No, you don't expect to be in this position ever. And this position, specifically the top 5, top 10 of the draft, is the only reliable place on planet Earth where you can find franchise quarterbacks. It's not a guarantee. Okay. Anyone who thinks there's a perfect prospect out there or a perfect trade or any kind of guarantee in the draft is fooling themselves, right? These are low probability, but on the spectrum of probability hitting on quarterbacks, this is the highest end. You're not trading for them. It doesn't happen. You're not signing for them. They never get to free agency. This is where you take your swing. And for people who think that Jaden Daniels, who just won a Heisman Trophy last year, seemingly coming out of nowhere and set all these records, is just going to pop up again next year. It doesn't happen. He was an outlier, right? Like there's a reason that he had an unprecedented season with 2 top 15 receivers, the best offensive line in the SEC. Like it was a complete historical outlier. So next year's class is bad. This year's has been loaded with 3 elite quarterbacks. We've known this. We've heard it for months. Take the guy, sit him if you need to, build the roster around him. Jacoby Brissett is here to take the hits, whether literally in the pocket or while you lose, to protect the quarterback. You're here. Make it the last time you're here for another 10, 15 years and take the kid.
If you like that clip, and how could you not? Check out more videos from Toucher and Hardy here. Point slightly up and to the left. For more Patriots analysis and opinion, hit this playlist. Point slightly down and to the left. And for the latest from the Sports Hub, download at 985thesportshub.com.